television screens exploding with bombs, tanks moving across border lines, and endless diplomatic sparring. All of it is merely the visible, tragic tip of the iceberg. Yet, on the other side of the coin, a silent but far more brutal war is raging. One rarely focused on by cameras, the war of figures, supply and demand balances, and global reserves. Today, let's set aside the Middle East map and instead open a colossal ledger, attributing the true reason behind the decades-long tension between the U.S., Israel, and Iran solely to ideology or mere border security would be insufficient. The real reason here is determining in whose favor the gears of the global financial system will turn. If you are ready to look far beyond the range of missiles and toward the root of money, we are dissecting that massive economic machine hidden behind the scent of gunpowder, the geopolitical cost of the Strait of Hormuz and energy supply. If you ask where the pulse of the global economy beats, the answer is not Wall Street, but that narrow waterway connecting the Gulf of Oman and the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz. This is not just a geographic location. It acts as a massive jugular vein for global energy needs, through which approximately 20% of the world's oil trade and one-third of liquefied natural gas passes. Iran holds its hand over this vein like a valve. Every day, about 21 million barrels of oil glide through this narrow passage, flowing into global markets. Now think, for the U.S. and Israel, encircling Iran is not just a military operation. It is an effort to wrestle control of this valve from an unpredictable power and bring it to a manageable status. Looking at it financially, a single day's disruption in the Strait of Hormuz has the potential to create immediate spikes of $20 to $30 per barrel in global oil prices. This does not just mean fuel price hikes. It means the cost of everything, from transportation to food, from manufacturing to technology, will multiply, and global inflation will spin out of control. For decision makers in Washington, Iran's presence here is like a sword of Damocles, dangling over global economic stability. On the other hand, as Israel moves toward becoming a playmaker in energy, with the massive natural gas deposits it discovered in the eastern Mediterranean, breaking Iran's regional and overseas power is vital for the security of these new energy routes. If Iran loses the ability to use this waterway as an economic weapon, the risk premium in energy markets will drop, and Western capital's investments in the region will be secured. This is equivalent to signing a billion-dollar insurance policy. Yet the issue is not just the passage of barrels. It is which currency and which banking systems are used to sell those barrels. Iran using this strategic passage as a card is actually the greatest point of physical resistance against the financial order imposed by the West. Consequently, this war was not launched to gain territory like classic old wars, but to retain the pricing power in global energy exchanges. In the next step, we will focus on which pieces of paper these barrels are exchanged for. That is, the hidden attack on the dollar's throne. The throne of the dollar and the hidden war of petrodollars. If you think that oil is just a black liquid, you are wrong. Oil is the modern world's greatest financial instrument. And this instrument has only one valid language: the US dollar. Since that historic agreement with Saudi Arabia, in the early 1970s, pricing every barrel of oil on earth in dollars has provided the U.S. with an unprecedented power of unrequited borrowing and global seigniorage. Here lies the deepest, most unknown point of the tension between Iran, the U.S., and Israel. For decades, Iran has been raising a flag against this petrodollar system. The Tehran administration, by attempting to sell its oil not just for dollars but for euros, yen, and even Chinese yuan, was actually launching a direct assassination attempt on Washington's global financial hegemony. Speaking in financial terminology, This move by Iran is a blow aimed at reducing the dollar's status as the reserve currency. If oil is not sold for dollars, the necessity for countries' central banks to hold massive dollar reserves disappears. When this scenario unfolds, the U.S.'s power to finance its massive budget deficits is shaken, and the American economy begins to collapse in on itself. That is why not just Iran's nuclear program, but the oil exchange it is trying to establish and its insistence on trading in local currencies are a matter of national security for the White House. From the Israeli perspective, the weakening of the U.S.'s financial power means the cutting off of military and economic aid to its greatest ally in the Middle East. Israel has entrusted its own security to the global unshakability of the U.S. dollar. The fundamental goal of the heavy sanctions the U.S. applies to Iran is not just to impoverish Iran but to prevent the spread of this non-dollar trade model by excluding it from SWIFT, the global banking system. With this new financial bloc it is trying to establish with China and Russia, Iran actually wants to end the era of the US dollar being the sole power in the world. This is a weapon far more effective than billions of dollars in military spending. What we call currency wars in financial markets has turned into the risk of real war in the Middle East, because if one country starts selling its oil in a unit other than the dollar, this could create a domino effect for other oil producers. In short, if this financial rebellion by Tehran is not suppressed, the balances in the global economic hierarchy could change fundamentally. The harsh resistance the US and Israel show against Iran is actually an effort to protect paper money's dominion over physical power. In the next section, we will look at the technological and industrial dimension of this massive economic war, that is, the role of defense industry and technology spending in this equation. The defense industry and the economics of security, a billion-dollar appetite. It is a great misconception to think that war is merely destruction. For the global economy, war is simultaneously a colossal market and a technological springboard. The tension between the U.S., Israel, and Iran is actually one of the main arteries feeding the world's largest defense industry ecosystem. Every hot wind blowing in the Middle East today creates an upward movement in the stock prices of defense giants in Washington. For behemoths like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, or Boeing, the Iran threat is not an abstract fear, but billions of dollars in order forms. From a financial perspective, this controlled tension in the region makes the Gulf countries the world's largest arms customers. Nations like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar, fueled by fear of Iran, push their defense budgets to record levels every year. The root of this money flows directly into the American economy. In other words, Iran's presence in the region and the military deterrence it creates actually constitute a massive export item for the U.S. If a permanent and unshakable peace is established in the region, this would mean the shrinking of this colossal defense market and a serious slowdown in U.S. industrial production. On the other hand, on the Israeli side of the coin lies a completely different technological economy. Israel has transformed this asymmetric war with Iran into the world's most advanced defense technology laboratory. From Iron Dome to cybersecurity software, many technologies are actually developed and tested against the Iran threat. These technologies are sold globally for billions of dollars with a combat-proven label. For the Israeli economy, the defense industry is not merely a security need. It is the engine of high-tech exports. The economic dimension of cyber warfare runs much deeper. Cyber attacks targeting Iran's infrastructure or digital operations alleged to be of Iranian origin have transformed the global cybersecurity market into a trillion-dollar industry. Corporations and governments have begun to spend fortunes to protect their digital assets. From a financial perspective, this tension actually provides massive R&D funding. Every new Iranian missile ensures that a more expensive defense system finds a buyer in the West. This creates an economic cycle we call the security dilemma. For investors, the risk of war can sometimes be a much more profitable harbor than the stagnation of peace. This harsh stance taken by the US and Israel against Iran simultaneously greases the gears of the military-industrial complex. This is not just a show of force. It is the marketing process of the world's most expensive software, most advanced chips, and most complex engineering projects. In short, this crisis in the Middle East functions like a colossal innovation incentive, shaping the global technology and industrial map. In the next section, we will go beyond these physical weapons and focus on the new treasure beneath the ground, that is, Israel's energy independence and the natural gas wars in the Eastern Mediterranean. The new treasure in the Mediterranean and gas wars. When thinking of the Middle East, the seemingly endless desert storms have now given way to silent giants beneath a deep blue sea. The colossal natural gas fields of the Eastern Mediterranean. With the discovery of massive fields like Leviathan and Tamar over the last decade, Israel has transformed from an energy-importing nation into a rising energy exporter and a strategic hub for the region. Financially, this means a new revenue stream worth tens of billions of dollars for the Israeli economy and a shield of geopolitical immunity. However, the greatest obstacle to this shield is the pressure Iran exerts through its regional axis of resistance and the security of these energy routes. Another critical pillar of the strategy pursued by the US and Israel against Iran is to ensure the safe and uninterrupted delivery of this natural gas to Europe, particularly as of 2026. The massive $35 billion gas deal with Egypt and the Eastern Mediterranean pipeline projects have made the region a primary alternative to end Europe's dependence on Russia. Yet there is a problem. Iran's allies in Lebanon and the region are positioned within direct range of these offshore platforms. For financial markets, energy security means the risk and cost of investment. If Israel's gas platforms remain under threat from Iranian-backed elements, the insurance costs for these massive projects multiply. Foreign investors flee, and the energy hub vision collapses. Therefore, breaking Iran's regional influence is not just a security matter for Israel. It is a commercial imperative to monetize the trillions of dollars in wealth beneath the Mediterranean and bring it to world markets. Where does the US fit into this equation? Washington aims, through projects like EastMed, to both secure Europe's energy security via its allies and to completely exclude Russian and Iranian influence from the Eastern Mediterranean. In financial language, this is ultimately a war for market share. Any military or political gain by Iran in the region casts a shadow over these new energy routes. The recent shutdown of platforms by major energy companies for security reasons following conflicts is the most concrete evidence of this economic vulnerability. To prevent billion-dollar investments from lying idle and to ensure that shipments to regional partners like Egypt and Jordan are not disrupted, Iran's regional deterrence had to be neutralized. In short, the immense wealth lying beneath the waters of the Eastern Mediterranean can only be fully converted into money in a scenario where Iran is excluded from the equation. This is not just a pipeline issue. It is the establishment of a new regional economic order. In the next section, we will look at the big picture, where all these pieces come together. The anatomy of sanctions and the Uri siege of the Iranian economy. How money is transformed into a weapon. The financial nuclear bomb, sanctions and economic siege. In the modern world, it is not always necessary to mass your armies at the border to bring a country to its knees. Sometimes, it is enough to push that country out of the global money game with a single press of a button. The policy of maximum pressure at the heart of the US and Israeli strategy against Iran is actually the most comprehensive financial siege history has seen. In financial terminology, we call this economic isolation, but in real life, it means stopping a country's cash flow. The deadliest weapon of this siege is the SWIFT system. Excluding Iran from this secure messaging network, where banks all over the world talk to each other, did not just make trade difficult for Tehran. It meant the severing of all legitimate and legal financial ties with the outside world. By the year 2026, over $100 billion in frozen Iranian assets stood in Washington's hands as a colossal bargaining chip and a financial hostage. Not releasing this money or allowing it to be spent only in a controlled manner for specific humanitarian needs significantly cut off the growth potential of the Iranian economy. Israel at this point was working like an intelligence hub that decrypted Iran's backdoor trade, that is, that secret financial network conducted through cryptocurrencies, shell companies, and unregistered gold trade. For financial markets, this situation means completely severing Iran from the global supply chain and transferring its market share to its competitors, particularly to pro-Western actors. This is a war of opportunity cost. The ghost tankers Iran resorted to for selling its oil and discounted sales of up to 20% actually mean that billions of dollars are flying out of Iran's pocket every year, with this money distributed to global brokerage firms and risk premiums. In an environment where inflation has anchored above 40% and the real loses value against the dollar every passing day, the US and its allies have in fact turned Iran's internal front, the purchasing power of the people, into a battlefield. This war of economic attrition is a much cheaper, but far more sustainable tool of pressure than a military intervention. Yet there is a risk here. The alternative payment systems and digital currency projects Iran is trying to establish with China and Russia to breach this siege have the potential to blind this financial weapon of the West. If Iran can surmount this siege, it could bring about the end of the US's global sanctioning power. That is why the threat of secondary sanctions applied to ensure that sanctions are not breached has become a secret constitution managing world trade today. For a company to trade with Iran means being barred from the US, the world's largest market. This is a financial suicide that no rational global player would dare risk. In short, the front of this war is the trading floors of the New York Stock Exchange and the Treasury rooms in Washington. In the next and final section, we will bring all these pieces together and ask the big question: who will be the winner of this colossal economic war? And what awaits us in the New World Order? The New World Order and the Winners Club. For 5 sections, we followed the flow of water, the color of oil, and the signature of money. Now is the time to ask the most crucial question. At the end of this global chess game, when the smoke clears, who will still be sitting at the table? The multidimensional war waged by the US and Israel against Iran is not just an effort to bring a country under control. It is a project to reconstruct the global economic architecture of the 21st century. If this pressure strategy succeeds, and Iran is integrated into the existing financial system by the West's rules, this would mean a colossal supply shock for global markets and a new wave of investment. Opening Iran's virgin energy fields to Western giants could trigger $1 trillion capital flow. Yet this is only one side of the coin. On the other side is the wind of reverse globalization created by this pressure. Iran being forced into the China and Russia axis actually caused the formation of a concrete and resilient alternative bloc against the West-centric financial system for the first time. From a financial perspective, we are actually witnessing the evolution of a unipolar dollar world into a unipolar world of digital assets and local currencies. For actors wishing to be in the winner's club, military power alone is no longer sufficient. They must simultaneously control energy routes, rare elements, and cyber financial networks, while Israel positions itself in this new order not just as a military power, but as the technology and energy gateway to the Eastern Mediterranean. The U.S. tries to turn this last major obstacle in the Middle East to its advantage, to protect the hegemony of the dollar and the defense industry. However, we must not forget that financial markets do not like uncertainty. This tension spinning out of control and turning into an all-out war could destroy all those delicate economic balances established until today. In a scenario where the price per barrel of oil exceeds $150 and supply chains break, an economic winter could be experienced where no one remains on the winning side. Ultimately, this relentless struggle between the U.S., Israel, and Iran will be recorded in the dusty pages of history, not as a fight of faith but as the modern world's war for resource distribution. The winner will be determined not by the hit rate of missiles, but by which side successfully passes the economic endurance test. When you continue to track the money, you will see that while the cost of peace is high, the bill for an uncontrolled war has always been much heavier. The future will belong to those who read the data correctly and foresee the root of money. Thank you for being with us on this financial journey. See you in our next strategic analysis.